Okay, welcome everyone. For those who are not aware, we use WhatsApp as a means of communication. You can send your questions directly to me. Let's make some silence first. Whatever jumps in your mind, forget about it. That is the place you need to keep empty. There's nothing new, nothing to create, nothing to decide. Only the preservation of silence at all times. So today we're going to talk about the thirst for liberation. The thirst for liberation is the fuel of the quest. The intensity of it in a way determines, it is an expression of the intensity of the thirst, and in a way the more intense it is, the more it is possible to open doors that were not reachable previously. So, and why is this important? Well, seekers tend to go from a little bit of curiosity towards spirituality, from curiosity to this high, intense thirst for liberation, where nothing else matters and where life becomes meaningless without it, without answering that call, to the point of sacrificing whatever is necessary. So in this curiosity, it doesn't make much of a difference. But as it becomes intense, well, that's when things become serious and when there is an actual chance for you as a seeker. Because without that thirst, you will conform. You will conform to life. It doesn't matter if it is a life in a worldly context or if it is in a spiritual context. It doesn't make much of a difference. And those of you who have this thirst, you are going to live this intensely, very intensely. But of course, in the beginning, it is the thirst for liberation with all the confusions of the character about the gains from liberation and all of that. It's like all the worldly desires trying to attach themselves to this idea of what liberation is, and that it will bring the realization of all these worldly desires. And that is a normal confusion that it comes in the beginning, and this is where clarifications are made. So from your standpoint, you're having this confusion, and from the standpoint of the divine, which is quite alive, it is the source of life, tests will be given to see if what is stronger. Is it the desire for liberation or the realization of those worldly goals? And usually what appears for the seeker of truth is that as he persists, as he continues, he gets more far away from his worldly desires, from the realization of those desires. And this brings a lot of suffering. But it is a need, because it is a way to transcend this personal story. And it doesn't matter in which context you are. As you reach intensity of suffering, These things comes more or less in cycles. You start deepening, intensifying your practices until you reach this barrier, a limit of your reality perception / delusion. And the way to overcome it, usually it is through these crises. So a lot of suffering is experienced in these moments. And then as you persist, you move a little bit beyond that. Or you give up and you return back to where you were. This is where the majority stands. Because there's immaturity. And there is the naive belief that, well, if I can't have one, I will have the other. Well, but your ideas deceive you, because this is just reflex. It has nothing to do with clarity. Absolutely nothing. Or you have it all, or you have nothing. This is the truth. And when you're reaching these levels, the only thing that you can trust is that what you have been feeding previously. And if you have been feeding the desire for liberation, intensifying that desire, making your willpower stronger, then in that moment it will help you. But if you have been feeding doubt, if you have been feeding this hankering for these worldly desires, fantasizing with them, then they will drag you. And the world, and let's just call it the world. Let's not refer to the parts of what seems the parts of the world as family, circumstances, this, that, the world. Illusion. It is there to distract you. And those who are still trying to move from a worldly oriented life to a spiritual oriented life, they will see their friends, family, all these people. Everybody saying, no, stop, that is too much, that is radical, for example. But let's see if they move, they make the transition, and they actually forget about that world and all of those things. And they are in the spiritual context now. Even there, it won't be different. When you're living circumstances with the purpose of liberation only, it becomes a spiritual environment. When you're living circumstances for circumstances, then it is a worldly environment for you. And this is the character's drive. It is always for the circumstances. It always drives and makes the circumstances important. To gain little nourishments or big ones. It depends what the circumstances may in his ideas offer. And even in a spiritual environment, or in spiritual environments, other seekers may tend to slow you down if they are living circumstances for the circumstances alone. And if you're coming with that thirst, with that intensity, they will tend to say, oh, it's not needed that much. Relax a little bit. And of course, you're in the beginning and you're listening this from someone who is a long-term seeker. And of course, inside of you, there is this need to calm down a little bit, to devoid your attention to circumstances. And you'll be pleased with that advice. But if you're a seeker of truth, really, you will be very upset with that advice. But that advice has a science, a more or less lost science. You see, when the intensity is big, the thirst for liberation is big, so big that in whatever circumstances that you are living, there is a restlessness. You cannot really be at peace because you haven't reached, you haven't answered completely the goal that is calling in your heart. You have done what you could, but still, so in a sense, there is an inner desperation. And this is where these people say, no, calm down, it takes time and all of that. But the science of it is that you need to embrace that restlessness. And that intensity which is bringing this restlessness will eventually, with time, become a powerful silence, a powerful stillness, a constant one. So this is not to reduce, it is not to reduce, it is to temper it, because it is something that pushes you, like this, there is this inner movement like this. And relaxing it would mean the opposite of this, but it isn't. It is to stabilize it at its highest peak and maintain it. When you succeed this intensity remains, and there is no and the need to maintain it disappears. And those who come to this level of practice, to this intensity, they go through these tests, like I said previously, and they have pretty much clear experience that they will not be able to transcend delusion. They will have this clear experience. They will know this as a fact. And for some, this attitude of giving up is what it's left, and taking a hold of life as it presents itself. So not everything is lost. Fine. But for the seeker of truth, this acknowledgement hits in a very different way. It brings humbleness to his heart. Humbleness to his mind. And he bows to the divine and begs and still remains. There's nothing for him there that he will be able to do, but still he remains there. So if you're not having this experience of not being able to, or you're really not pushing anything, sometimes it is the case. You're not doing what it is at your reach, so you're not seeing it. But if you are doing everything at your reach, you will see this clearly. And if there is nothing else of value, really of value to you, you will stay there. Humbling yourself, completely open, surrendered. You know that you're not able, not because you're weak, not because you didn't work enough, because it is too much. Still the desire is there. And if you're not trying to blackmail the divine, that happens also. If you're really sincere, at one point, that door will open. But if you're not that sincere, if you were still, how do you say this, protecting those worldly desires, those worldly goals, eventually you will be pulled back onto them. And that is emptiness, suffering, the usual. And there is this idea that there are things to be done. There is an option. This is what the mind says. And okay, next time, next life, I'll take care of it. That is interesting. If you have that thirst for liberation, feed it constantly. The more the world is agreeing with you, the wronger you are. And no matter what happens, no matter what the world says, no matter what your mind says, because your mind just speaks in the same language as the world, you keep intensifying that thirst. Sometimes you'll make, in the world's view, radical changes, decisions, whatever. And the goal of that is to establish yourself more and more completely, to strengthen your resolution. And your attention will be always moving more upwards instead of things, circumstances, people, and all of this. The natural impulse is, and this is one of the reasons that it takes so long for some, for the majority. It's because of these worldly, physiological, circumstantial desires. Seekers tend to bargain with the inner call for liberation. And they give a lot of excuses, and that is only, but only, to live these worldly desires, not knowing that these are just the currents of suffering. And the more you suffer, the more entangled you are with the world. But in your logic, it seems more plausible, more doable, that your chances are bigger. But there isn't. If you have that thirst, intensify it as much as you can. Focus on it. Give it full spectrum in your life. The restlessness that arises is telling you that there are things out of order. And that will take you to new heights. And as you get more and more established, and that means to be established on the quest for truth, not having where to turn back to, where to go back to. Because when this intensity is there, this restlessness, it brings agitation. It is agitation in a way. So this cooling it down, it's not doing this movement, it is establishing in a higher frequency. But to do this, a lot of things have to be unrooted. And anything else besides this quest for liberation is just wasting time. Intensify it as much as you can and follow that direction that it is pointing. And as much as you can, detach your personal ideas, your personal desires, detach it from your concept of liberation, because it is just polluting. It's like you have to make a journey that you don't know where destination will be, and you'll be just following the clues and wanting to finish that journey. Because if you allow your images of liberation to pollute, those images are just the reflex of those personal desires, those personal goals, and you're transforming the quest for liberation in just another way to access these worldly goals, to realize them, to live them, to experience them. And that ends the quest for liberation. It becomes something else. So the intensity, the restlessness that comes from the desire for liberation, it is very needed. And these days, much more needed. So these teachings that were given about calm, it may take a lifetime or more lifetimes for liberation, depending on the karma that each one has. For the seeker of truth, that means I have to work harder. Because if it's going to take so long, if it can take so long, I haven't got a moment to waste. For the seeker of well-being, because if it can take so many lives, so I'll just go and do something else and take it slowly and like this. So the seeker of well-being, the seeker of truth, they look at the same thing and they get always, usually, opposite understandings, opposite opinions about things. The same teaching brings opposite interpretations. So that which really decodes the spiritual teaching is the eyes and the heart of the seeker of truth. The curious, the seeker of well-being, he will decipher something else which is suitable to his real agenda. The restlessness, the thirst is pushing you towards where you really need to be and to establish yourself in that, to uproot all these worldly desires, to make them meaningless, and to establish you on the boat of the real desire, the quest for liberation. This is what that restlessness is doing. There will be a need to come to terms with that, to release it a little bit, because it is difficult to experience it, that restlessness. Don't fall for that. So if you have that thirst, if you have that restlessness in your heart, that desire, strong desire for liberation, that means you are blessed. And to honor that blessing that is to you. So these words and this explanation may not seem very inclusive, fit for pleasing everyone. And that's because it isn't. These words are for the seeker of truth. And also for those who really aspire to become one. No one else. Those who are playing spirituality, distracting without... Well, I'm not talking to them. So if you have this thirst in your heart, honor it, intensify it. Don't listen to anybody. And understand the inner struggle. What this desire for liberation, where it is pointing you, where it is pulling you, and where the character, your preferences, your likes, your dislikes, where is this pulling you? And you will see that they are not moving in the same direction. If they are, there is something confusing there. Things are not in the right place. When they are in the right place, they will pull in different directions. And you will get a clear vision of these mechanics of your delusion. And the more you can see them, the more you will be able to put them aside. Theoretical knowledge of the path has very little or nothing to do with its practical aspects. Now answering the question here. It was a question made by Jean. And the first question was about, it's not here, but okay, but I remember. It was about if there was a way to see the satsang with the Google Translator to make it understand it for another language. Well, my friend, I have no idea about it, but it will be difficult for you to have a good translation of the satsang because, well, my English is not even correct. So to have a good translation, you would need a good language in the case and a very good translator, and both are deficient, so understanding will be complicated. You will have to trust your intuition. Maybe that's not a bad thing. Okay, the other question was, as I made a reference to meditation the last satsang, also when you talk about making meditation, is it the same of making self-inquiry? If it's not, then what is the difference? Well, when I talk about meditation, it kind of includes all levels of practice. And making self-inquiry, in a sense, is a practice of concentration. Because when we talk about meditation, practicing a meditation, it is in a way a practice of concentration. Meditation is that which transcends this concentration, where the one that is concentrating and that which is being concentrated upon, they both disappear. More or less the same. So self-inquiry is a step further into this holding on to an object as a meditation practice. But when I speak about meditation, I'm including all levels of practice. From the practice of meditation that you hold on to a technique or to self-inquiry. So the practical aspects of meditation, they boost your practice of self-inquiry a lot. Without it, it's, well, something else. But that's not the subject today. Okay, so next satsang will be Sunday, 9 o'clock in the morning, Brazilian time, UTC -3. Until then, intensify your practices, intensify your quest, make it real for you. Don't lose yourself in the automatics, in the daily activities, in all of that. Each morning, each beginning of the day, reaffirm your goals. Evaluate your investments. Turn everything into the same direction. Do not allow any distractions. Okay. much.